Determined, well-funded, ruthless. Ruthless. This is our challenge. What makes our job even more surprising is the fact that our cause seems so obviously, almost self-evidently right. Especially today in the age of the sonogram, who can really deny that the unborn are human beings? Well, I really don't know if we're dealing with life, Dinesh. Well, the beauty is today we know what life is. In fact, we've got all these projects to search for life on other planets. And if these great search engines, if you will, saw a single index of life, just a movement over here, they would go, wow, that's life. And is there any doubt that the fetus, that the unborn, is human life? It's obviously not any other kind of life. And some people say, well, I don't know, how do we know when life begins? We're not sure. Well, even if we weren't sure, one would think we'd want to give it the benefit of the doubt. I mean, if I'm out hunting in California and I see a motion in the trees, I whip out my gun. It could be a deer, but it could be my neighbor Bob. I don't exactly open fire, do I? I give it the benefit of the doubt because I'm not sure. Well, we hear from the Supreme Court, we have been hearing really now since Roe, that abortion is a right that is protected in the Constitution. Well, I'm not one of those guys who carries around a pocket Constitution, but I know the document pretty well. If you look in it, there's nothing about it. And even if you try some tricks, you hold the Constitution up to the light, you squeeze lemon juice on it, doesn't really matter. Abortion does not magically appear as a protected right in the Constitution. And the sad thing is that the people who affirm it to be a right, they don't even mean it's a right. They mean that it's, well, you could almost call it a super right. They consider it a right that is actually more important than all the other rights. How do we know this? Well, consider all the people who say and insist that not only should abortion be legal, it should actually be funded by the government. And this is a respectable position, and it's defended on the grounds that, well, if it's not funded by the government, it's not really a right at all, because someone may not be able to afford to do it. So the government has to provide them with the means to have the abortion. Otherwise, the right itself is kind of meaningless. Now, it's kind of illuminating in thinking about this to think about all our other rights. We have a First Amendment right to speak, a Second Amendment right to own a firearm, a religious freedom right also from the First Amendment. Now think about this, which of those rights are funded by the government? And the answer is none. I have a right to free speech, but does the government provide a newspaper? They don't even provide a website. I have a right to religious freedom. Is the government going to build me a church? No, they're specifically prohibited from doing that. So the fact of the matter is that our most basic, fundamental, constitutional rights are not funded by the government, but there are people who want abortion to be funded, which tells me that they consider abortion to be a mega right. You may say that in the church of modern progressivism, abortion has become almost a sacrament. And here we are in a society that is always talking about compassion. I don't know how much time you spend on social media, but there's always somebody weeping on social media. There's always somebody invoking compassion. Lately, it's this girl from Sweden. She has incredible compassion for the planet. so we see in America this kind of radius of compassion now, and the compassion is always extending to some other group that was previously excluded. Compassion for the outsider, compassion for the illegal immigrant, compassion for the snail darter, compassion for the guy working in a sweatshop in Thailand. And this extending circumference of compassion somehow, mysteriously, excludes the unborn who are right here amidst us. So why is it the case that the unborn are somehow counted out in this expanding radius of compassion? Why is it that a political party in this country that is almost the party of moist eyes, nevertheless, is the party that is relentlessly opposed to protecting every human life? What's going on here? For me, the abortion debate, I kind of came into it almost sideways. Many years ago, I was reading the famous Lincoln-Douglas debates, which are debates from the 19th century between Abraham Lincoln, the Republican, and Stephen Douglas, the Democrat. They were running for the Senate in Illinois. Later they would compete against each other for the presidency in 1860. And they were actually arguing not about abortion, they were arguing about slavery. But as I began to think about the arguments they were making, I realized that they were identical in substance and almost identical in form to what we would call the pro-life debate today. So ironically, this debate we have now over life has an historical echo, and it's almost an eerie echo. So Douglas, the Democrat, had what you could call the pro-choice position. And Douglas argued, hey, listen, slavery, who's to say if it's right or wrong? Some people think it's a good idea, other people don't. We live in a big country. Are we going to try to take a single moral view and impose it on the whole country? No. Let's agree to disagree. We're a democratic society, so why don't we let every community, every territory, every state choose for itself if it wants to have slavery. Let's let every group vote for slavery up or down as it wishes. Choice. Now notice that in Douglas's case, he's defending choice not at the individual level. What he's basically saying is every group should decide for itself. But the pro-choice principle could not have a more able defender. Douglas says, I'm not for slavery. I just think we have a right to choose. On the other side of this debate is a lanky, somewhat dour man, Abraham Lincoln, who makes, long before we thought of it, what could be called the pro-life argument. And Lincoln says, in effect, yes, in most things, we do and should have a right to choose, but not in all things. You may say that the choice principle has a very important exception. Just as your right to swing your arm has to stop when your arm comes in contact with my jaw. In other words, just as your right cannot be exercised at the expense of mine, so Lincoln argues that the right to choose cannot be indifferent to the content of the choice. What is being chosen? And Lincoln argues, I think irrefutably, that you cannot choose to terminate the choices of other people. That's really Lincoln's argument against slavery. The other guy also has a right to choose, and you can't choose to cancel out his choices. You can't cancel out his life. You don't have the right to do that. And so here, screaming right out of the bowels of history, is, you might say, the very debate we're having today. Anchored in American history and laying out, I think, the core of what is the pro-life position. Namely, everyone has a right to live, everyone has a right to choose their own life. Now, why has abortion not only become normalized in American society, but why is it today that it seems to have made this kind of nasty transition where we have gone from choice alone to literally people defending abortion as a positive good? Shout your abortion. You go on YouTube, you see all these people shouting their abortion. They're not ashamed of it. They think they're doing something great, or at least that's how they present it. This almost seems like a moral inversion. And I want to try to say what I think has been going on in America. I've been trying to figure this out for a number of years. We have definitely seen a huge moral shift in American society, but I think it's not quite the moral shift that we sometimes think it is. Many times when I talk to people and I say, what do you think's happened in America? America's so different than it was. And they say, well, we've seen a moral decline. Essentially what we've seen is that standards of morality have really plummeted. And the example of this, of course, is look at young people. But what I find when I listen to young people today, I spend a lot of time on the campus, I have a good feeling for how young people see the world. I realize that it's not so much that moral standards have plummeted, it's not that they've gone down, it's almost as if we have now discovered in this country, young people have a new source for morality. And I tell you this because I think as we think about the pro-life issue, and some of us think that it's a single issue, I want to show that it's actually embedded in a much larger political and cultural context. What we have seen in America is a shift, not a decline of morality so much as a shift in the source of morality. And here's what I mean. I think if you lived in America from the founding, or from the beginning, all the way till World War II, maybe even the 60s, you would see that in America, the vast majority of the society believed in what I'm going to call the external moral code. What I mean by the external moral code is the idea that there's a moral order in the universe that is external to us, and it makes claims on us. So a good example of the external moral code would be the 10 Commandments. Who came up with the 10 Commandments? You didn't. I didn't. They're a codification of God's laws. They're an external code that makes demands on us. Now, it's not to say all of us live up to them. We might fall short. But the point is, even if you fall short, you accept the standard that is supplied to you. You measure your progress by the degree to which you can live up to the commands of this external moral code. Now, remarkably in America today, we've seen a change, and the change I would say is from the external moral code to what can be called the inner self. The inner self. The inner self